In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my Freezing Rain build. This is a continuation of the Cold Archer build if you play this as a beginner build. And it's kind of based off the beta version of this build rather than the live version that I published because we are using the Rapid Fire skill. So I was finally able to make a Rapid Fire build that I was happy with, kind of modeled off of that, and there are a couple reasons that it worked here. And the first is because of the repeating aspect, which makes it so that Rapid Fire has up to a 90% chance to ricochet to another target when you put it on a two-handed weapon. This would ideally be on your bow because you want this to ricochet every chance possible. The drawback of using Rapid Fire, of course, is that it tends to hit in a straight line and you very rarely get any AoE. Because of these ricochets, you're going to get more AoE damage, making it much more viable. And the other reason is because I found a way to use Rapid Fire without having any energy problems. And this is through the use of the exploit glyph. What this exploit glyph does when you have the additional bonus is when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This cannot happen more than once every 20 seconds. So what's really great about this is we don't have a way to apply vulnerable naturally, but this solves that problem for us, so enemies are going to get additional vulnerable damage, which makes them go down really fast. And the way this solves our energy problem is through the improved Rapid Fire upgrade, which makes it so that you gain 15 energy per cast of Rapid Fire when it damages a vulnerable enemy. Well, Rapid Fire casts 20 energy, so you only net loss 5 energy when using this, which is usually more than enough to get you through most boss fights. However, if for some reason it's not, we also have the enhanced stealth upgrade of Concealment, which gives you 40 energy when you enter Concealment, so you can pop Concealment to gain some instant energy if you really need some. And I also have the Aftermath passive completely maxed out, which gives you 75 energy when you use your ultimate skill, which you use really regularly with this build. And that's because we have the Preparation Specialization, which makes it so every 100 energy you spend, you reduce your ultimate skill cooldown by 4 seconds. So basically every 5 rapid fires, you're going to shave 4 seconds off your Rain of Arrows skill. And since we have no need of basic attack, we can just keep using Rapid Fire to attack every enemy we see, making this happen very regularly. And Rain of Arrows is absolutely amazing in this build, and I feel like it belongs in a marksman type build or any range type build. You can use this thing through walls to just wipe out rooms of enemies. It knocks them down, it takes your imbuement into account. And because we're using the unique Word of Hakan, it also applies all imbuments every time you use this, meaning you're going to freeze enemies, poison them, and inflict them with the Shadow imbuement, making them explode when you kill them. And this absolutely makes this completely devastating. However, if you don't have this unique amulet yet, I recommend using Shadow Clone. I like to swap this out anyway for like world bosses where, Rain of Arrows isn't really that effective. It's more effective against lots and lots of enemies, whereas Shadow Clone's more focused. And this can help you out as well. And there is an aspect that you can apply to your equipment as well that allows you to apply the imbuments you use to your Shadow Clone so you can help freeze around the room, helping to slow things down more and deal more damage. So the first thing we're using obviously here is Cold Imbuement. This makes it so that we can freeze and chill enemies, increasing our damage to them via the Frigid Finesse passive and also through the Control glyph that we have, which increases our damage against crowd-controlled enemies as well as chilled and frozen enemies. So we get a lot of damage to frozen enemies here. And I challenged myself when putting this build together not to use other imbuments. I don't have Shadow or Poison here. There's a lot of Archer builds out there with Shadow Poison or Poison Ice or Poison Shadow, including my own builds, but I wanted to just make it fully frozen with this build and see if it was viable, and it absolutely is. So we just have this one as well as the Frigid Finesse upgrade in order to get even more damage. Besides this, as I mentioned earlier, I have Concealment, and what this allows you to do is become unstoppable, go invisible, and I have it set to make my next attack critically strike. And what I really love about this skill is, one, if you do get CC'd, this will bust you out of it, get you out of a bad situation. 2, it boosts your movement speed, so it allows you to run away. If you open a door and you're like, oh crap, there's a whole bunch of enemies, you can run away real quick, they can't see you and they can't catch up to you. And also that instant critical when you come out of it is fantastic if you couple it with Rain of Arrows. There's nothing like dropping an all crit Rain of Arrows on a room of enemies and just watching them all explode. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use it in a pinch to get some energy as well if you're low on energy because a fight drags out. Remember that you only have vulnerability on enemies for the first 3 seconds, so you need to kill them quickly, otherwise you're going to run out of energy. And we also have Smoke Grenade here. I absolutely love Smoke Grenade in this build. What it does is it dazes enemies in a small AoE, and dazed enemies cannot attack or use skills. And why this is so fantastic is a lot of times you have like a really nasty elite you're facing or something like that. You just hit them with this and they're completely disabled. They can't do anything while you just sit there and wail into them. It completely nullifies some of the most dangerous elites in this game. Additionally, we have it upgraded so that it increases the damage we do to things that are affected by smoke grenades. So if you throw it into a crowd, you're going to deal more damage. And also we have the upgrade that makes it unlucky hit. Dealing direct damage to enemies affected by smoke grenade has a 25% chance to reduce its cooldown by 1 second, or by 3 seconds instead if the enemy is vulnerable. Well, we have a lot of vulnerability in this build, making the cooldown of this get reset rather easily, because we do have some ways of getting extra lucky hit, but this helps to just make it so you can use Smoke Grenade more often. And one really good synergy that applies between Smoke Grenade and Frost is the Frostbitten aspect, which makes it so that chilled enemies hit by your grenade skills have a chance equal to double your critical strike chance to be instantly frozen for 2 seconds. So if you drop your Caltrops, that's cold damage, enemies get chilled, and then you throw this into the middle of them, you have a chance to instantly freeze some of them, drastically boosting your damage against them. And it also natively increases your critical strike damage against frozen enemies, which is fantastic because we're dealing with frozen enemies a lot. And then we also, again, have Caltrops here. This is an AoE that kind of shoots you backward, and in this case does a little bit of damage, sets chilled on enemies that walk in it, and it does cold damage. And this is really great for, you know, like you open a door, you don't know what to do, there's a bunch of enemies right in front of you, you can hit Caltrops, it'll automatically kick you backward, it'll make them crowd controlled, so you'll get that boost in damage from crowd control. They're chilled, so you get that boost in damage to chilled. And then if you lob your Smoke Grenade in there, you might freeze some of them, or at least all days, so they can't do anything, and then you just go to town with cold imbuement on them, or if you're really desperate and the room's really bad, you just pop Rain of Arrows, and that's over. So that's really the core concept of the build. There isn't really any gear that you must have for this build to work. There's obviously things that make it better, like the Word of Hakan, but nothing absolutely mandatory. Really, the most important part here is getting the exploit glyph and slotting that and getting the bonus from it, because this is going to drastically boost your damage. I mean, putting vulnerable on everything you attack, and if you have plus vulnerable damage on your equipment, could mean you're getting up to 70, 80, 100% more damage on enemies you're attacking, and then obviously getting those resources back every time you attack them allows you to just keep attacking, really facilitating this playstyle. So the way I accomplished this was by picking the main board and then going into the Cunning Stratagem board, which really doesn't help us at all because we don't use combo points for this build, but then just kind of going over to the glyph there and taking that and then putting in the points I needed to get the exploit passive bonus. And then taking other nodes in here that boost core skill damage. There are a lot of nodes that increase your core skill damage, and since most of our damage comes from rapid fire, that worked out nicely. I'll probably very soon exit this board and go into a different board, because there isn't really too much more left on this board for me. We don't really want the Cunning Stratagem legendary node. We just want those core passives, and obviously to be able to use exploit. So for my key passive here, I'm using Victimize. What this does is on lucky hit, dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has up to a 30% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 23% of the original damage to them and surrounding enemies. Well, because you're spreading vulnerable around, this is easy to do, and this allows you to get more AoE damage, which is great, because Barrage is lacking in AoE damage, and this works very, very nicely. It also synergizes well with the aspect of Cruel Sustenance, which makes it so that explosions triggered by this passive heal you for life. And this is a good way to give you extra healing while you just sit there and gun enemies down. Now, if you find you're not taking too much damage, I would recommend taking the Precision Key passive to further boost your damage. And you may, because frankly, you don't get hit too much with this build. Things just die. I tend to stay off the edge of the screen, particularly when I'm doing way higher level Nightmare Dungeons than myself, so that I don't get hit. A lot of people have been joking that this is the door build, because I stand in a doorway and shoot, and I very rarely go into a room. But if you like playing a long-range build, then you don't necessarily need this because you're not going to take a lot of damage. But I frankly like it for the extra healing and the explosions for AoE damage. On my helm, I have Cowl of the Nameless. This gives me cooldown reduction, which is great for our ultimate, crowd control duration, more energy, and it gives you a lucky hit chance increase against crowd control enemies. This isn't, again, mandatory for this build. It's just very nice. This helps with, you know, lucky hit against things that we're doing, basically, because everything should be crowd controlled a lot of the time, particularly when you're using Frost and you're using Caltrops and you're using your Smoke Grenade. All of those things are considered crowd control, so it's very nice to have. I also have Grasp of Shadow unique here, but again, this was not mandatory. It has attack speed on it, has vulnerable damage. Both of those are good for this build. Shadow Clone damage, so if you're using the Shadow Clone ultimate, this is good. It has ranks to core skills, which is great because, you know, rapid fire damage. And it also makes it so on lucky hit, damaging a vulnerable enemy with a Marksman or Cutthroat skill has up to a 30% chance to summon a Shadow Clone that mimics your attack. This is fantastic for this build because you are hitting vulnerable enemies all the time, and you have decent lucky hit chance from the helmet if you're using that, getting you extra damage from the Shadow Clone. But again, you don't absolutely have to have these for this build, they're just nice to haves. I also have Accelerating Aspect, which makes it so critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by up to 25%. This makes you attack faster, getting out damage faster. We also have the Vengeful Aspect, which says on lucky hit, making an enemy vulnerable has up to a 50% chance to grant 3 increased critical strike chance for 3 seconds, up to 9%. This triggers all the time, as we're spreading vulnerable around all the time, so you're going to get your critical strike chance up no problem. Smiting Band is on here as well. This increases your critical strike chance against enemies that are below 35% health and increases your crowd control duration if you're healthy by 40% or up to 40%. Both of these are great because when you are running low on energy, if a fight runs long, you want to have increased critical strike chance against those enemies to finish them off. And also if you fire like, rain of arrows into a room or caltrops when you're at full health, enemies will be chilled or frozen longer, allowing you to fire into them more. And then lastly, I have Aspect of Intercom, which just makes it so the longer you stand still, the more damage you do. You tend to stand still a lot with this build. You don't always stand still. But a lot of times if you just open a door and you start unloading, you're going to be standing there for at least 3 seconds. You don't really need to move much. And another aspect you should absolutely look out for, unfortunately I wasn't able to get this one, is the Mangler's aspect, which says on lucky hit, dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has up to a 45% chance to daze them for 2 seconds. Remember that enemies that are dazed cannot attack you or use skills, so you could theoretically daze things all over the screen that, then can attack you. And this is also considered crowd control, so any extra damage you have from like control or anything else to crowd controlled enemies or to dazed enemies will kick into effect, and you'll deal more damage to them. So this is just really, really good to have. So that wraps up our Freezing Rain build. This is a fantastic build. This is probably my favorite build I put together so far. The Cold Archer in the beta was what I wanted to make into my build, and with these things I was able to finally see this thing come into fruition. And it works phenomenally. So if you've been looking for a good cold archer, a good ranged archer that just uses cold, that freezes and absolutely wrecks things, this is the build for you.
We'll be right back.